after Prospero softens and basically says like, okay, you could marry her, he's very adamant and very explicit about you have to make sure that when you guys, when you guys have sex, like it can only be after marriage. It cannot be before marriage. He doesn't use the same language that he uses in reference to Caliban, which was violate my daughter's honor. But he does say something like, if you break, the marital knot or something beforehand, the kinds of, plagues that he calls upon both Miranda and Ferdinand is very similar to the plagues that he calls towards Caliban. It seems every single night, like tonight you will have cramps, right? He's constantly like, telling Caliban that, he's going to summon this or that indignity and physical, impairment upon him. And he's doing a similar thing here, right? If there's going to be this, but he's not talking about rape in that case, right? He's talking about consensual sex between Ferdinand and Miranda.
Oh, virginity was serious geopolitical business at that time, man. I mean, people, nobles would marry their children off to one another, and there would be huge numbers of people that went into the bridal chamber after the first night of marriage to check if there was blood on the sheet. I mean, if there wasn't, like a whole trade agreements and military alliances could fall apart if there was any sense of like perfidy or deception on the part of a noblewoman or a female member of the royal family. So it was serious fucking business at the time.
And imagine how crazy it is. Like things get so warped in those ways that to me it's just it's totally insane to me that as a male you would ever want to marry a virgin. But I guess given certain kind of circumstances like that, it's kind of like
that's a lot easier to say in the age of antibiotics.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a lot easier to say in the age of antifungal creams.
It is interesting how these things could shift so dramatic and seems like so dramatically against biological imperatives. Like you could definitely construct a just so story, and it's not just a just so story. Like there's a lot of credibility to it. So but it is kind of interesting how putting all that aside, there's still the discussion of consensual sex is given with the same exact penalties as non-consensual sex. Right. It's the same kind of set of penalties. It's the same pestilence that will have to infect you. It's this, it's that. It's not just about, whether or not my daughter feels happy in a situation. Right. It's not merely about whether or not her honor is being violated. A lot of it just goes down to property rights, extension of property, women being, in a sense, property in that way. So to just put a little bit, not even to deny whether or not rape, or an attempted rape occurred, but just to complicate that sort of a reading, there's that little aspect to it. There's also the fact that, we could totally put aside any questions of the fact of the matter and simply still have to deal with the fact that, hey, look, whatever in fact transpired or didn't transpire, even if we concede everything, the bottom line is in this situation, we're simply getting the rendition of events as presented by the victor, right? As presented by the one that is able to write the history, as presented by someone who has a lot of a natural, almost inhuman power. There was this one, when the whole when the comedic conspiracy emerges, between Caliban and his new friends, this is how it was phrased. Remember first to possess his books, for without them, he's but a sot as I am, right? This idea that the second that you take away books or rationality or these trappings of things that make a human being, but animals obviously they have nothing to do with books, right? It's something that's within their ken. But for human beings, once you have these trappings of all this additional stuff that people could do, that's the thing that really makes you human. And with these kinds of powers, right, he's going to be the one that writes all this. Even in the discussion between Prospero and Ariel, as far as okay, Sycorax, which is Caliban's mom, she was in this, she was in this island, and she trapped you in this cloven pine for it seemed like it was less than 12 years because she died when he was in it, and he was just essentially left there until Prospero came back. That story is still told by Prospero, and he uses it as a cudgel against Ariel. He's like, you forgot what happened to you, didn't you? You forgot how I found you. You forgot. Ariel says, no, I didn't. And then he speaks for Ariel. This is what happened. This is how I found you, right? He's obsessed as a kind of like literati or whatever you want to call it, magician, whatever, right? Intellectual, he's obsessed with constructing that story. Sycorax, we don't know anything about her other than what Prospero says, and what Ariel doesn't even say, what he like assents to with a nod or with like a word or two. And that's not to say that, Sycorax wasn't a total piece of shit. I mean, maybe she really was. But the point is, whatever the facts of the matter are, still they are being written by the victor in this island, right? And that's definitely something to keep in mind.
Yeah, the other thing that I would say is the post-colonial reading of this play sort of gets me a little bit, because unless they somehow got so lost that they went through the Strait of fucking Gibraltar, they are clearly on an island in the Mediterranean Sea. They went from Naples to Tunis to marry Alonso's daughter to the king of Tunis, which is in Tunisia, which is in the northeast part of Africa, which is,
and Sycorax is from Algiers.
And Sycorax is from Algeria. So clearly this is not in the New World. I guess this could be an island off the coast of Africa, in which case there's sort of a post-colonial reading. But Algeria was controlled, I mean, assuming that this takes place maybe somewhere in the 1500s, talking about the grand time of Italian city-states and the King of Naples and the Duke of Milan being really, really important people, or the 1600s or the early 1600s when the play is thought to have been written, I mean, this is really like, there's something weird going on actually with, because I mean, it does sort of, it's weird because if somebody didn't bring it up, you could be easily forgiven for not catching it. But once you're made aware, like, there is something here about like the early days of colonization and inhabitants of the New World. But it's weird because there's also, I mean, Algeria was an Islamic principality at the time. It was this was before the French colonization of Algeria. It was controlled by Muslims at the time that this was written. It was only a few centuries after the Muslims were expelled from Spain, and the ones that were expelled from Spain, they mostly went to North Africa, as far as I know, and Algeria would have been one of those places. And it said that Sycorax was causing a lot of problems in Algiers and was expelled from there, but she had rendered some kind of service or done something that they chose not to kill her. They chose just to banish her. So, I mean, this is
the official position, I think, of Shakespearean scholarship is it's because that she was pregnant, so she was spared the death penalty, and says she was banished. It was a common thing at the time that women, to avoid prison sentences, they would get pregnant. But at the same time, I heard that prior to even like reading the Tempest. But when you actually do read the Tempest, you're right that it's actually not, you can't make that deduction, 100% this is what's being said. So it does actually sound like she might have done something for them, like depending on how you parse that language, right? So what, like, all the official pronouncements about this, I don't think you could necessarily accept them as like this is it's all in reference to her pregnancy.
Yeah, and it's weird because like magic at the time, like in this era, I mean, magic means a lot of things in a lot of different times and places, but it was sort of understood as a continued usage or sense of honor or fealty to like pagan rituals, like pre-Christian pagan rituals. And yet the dark magic here is coming from what was at the time like a Muslim principality, and it's banished to an island in the Mediterranean between North Africa and Italy. And but Prospero comes and he's also doing magic, but his magic is like good for some reason. Like he sees like the dark magic from the Muslim principality sees the control of nature that that Ariel represents and cannot harness it. But the good person from Europe comes to the island and is able to free Ariel and is able to harness the power of Ariel to his own ends. And so again, this is kind of why I keep coming back to, because there's something here about like, because I would imagine like it wasn't totally unknown to Europeans that during the period that we call the Dark Ages, the Islamic world was experiencing like a great flowering of arts and literature and science, and that they were, sort of the grand tradition of Rome continued in the Islamicate world. It wasn't like there was just a period of almost 1,000 years where there was no accomplishment whatsoever. It just wasn't happening in Europe specifically, and even then, that's not entirely true. But it's closer to the truth, and so there's something about here about like Shakespeare almost recognizing, maybe intuitively, maybe implicitly, like there was some kind of ball that was dropped, like some sort of possibility of wisdom and enrichment and power that was dropped in the Muslim world, that now we hear in this, early modern, verging on something great, European Christendom, we have the potential to pick up on, but we can't be seduced by it, and we can't let it be like the crux of our rule. I mean, there is and I think this is almost this is part of what makes the whole New World, colonial, post-colonial reading, whatever, viable, is that there is clearly something on the horizon that Shakespeare gets on like almost like a goosebump deep level or something like that. There's like something that he is recognizing the beginnings of, that is just like starting to percolate in his time period, that he can't quite articulate, or he can't quite, like, he can only sort of find these like bits and bobs, and sort of put them together into this sort of sort of allegorical or parable, or whatever you want to call it, fable almost, about this duke that's been exiled to this island and sort of left to fester in his own studiousness, and has to spend 12 years thinking about like what that actually means and what kind of a ruler he really wants to mean. But he can't quite articulate it. It's all sort of discombobulated and strewn throughout various parts of the text.
And it's one of those things where, if you want to invoke Leonard Shlain's art and physics, right, the idea that artists see ahead of even like, physical facts, scientific facts, other kinds of facts, historical facts, there is like something about, the whole kind of Algiers connection, right? Algeria being something that has become very much just like a total symbol, right, in many respects of, like post-colonial struggle, decolonization, right? In terrorism, we talk about things like the Algeria model, right, of decolonization, that sort of thing. And, here it is playing a prominent role. To your point about, these Muslims are practicing what seems to be black magic. Prospero is practicing white magic, which is permissible. One thing that I do appreciate about the play is how, even if that's in fact the case, that idea seems to be critiqued as well in the play, right? Mm-hmm. Like, Prospero does ultimately give up his magic. And part of this might be, in terms of psychoanalysis, right? If Prospero recognizes within himself that, what, I am very much like an absent-minded professor type. And this thing is kind of like, like here I am, I'm regressing further and further into childhood, right? Here I am like alone in this island, or mostly alone. And I just essentially do whatever I want. I could, be a tyrant to whomever I want. And, psychoanalytically, maybe he wants to like transcend that and kind of like, finally become an adult and whatnot, give away his daughter and not, claim ownership of her any longer. But on the other level, right, there's still, something to be said for the idea that, magic in general, if it's a stand-in for tyranny, if it's a stand-in for something else, something about that is inapplicable to the modern world.